All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
If you watched our awesome State of the Union live coverage, you'll all be briefly familiar with my monologue today. I thought it was, well, mostly fine. A laundry list of the traditional check boxes that any generic Democratic president would make. A missed opportunity, in my opinion, to use the Ukraine crisis to unify the country around a single message. No war abroad, war against fear and scarcity here at home. Central to both of those aims was something conspicuously absent from that speech: nuclear power. Biden spent a significant portion of the speech allaying the concerns of Americans over higher gas prices, noting that he, in concert with U.S. allies, would release 60 million barrels of oil from the various strategic petroleum reserves across the world. I applaud that action, and yet, what happened to the oil price? It soared after the Biden announcement. Besides that news, with some analysts now predicting that we could still hit as high as $150 a barrel despite the announcement. An average gas price across this country of $4 a gallon or even $5 a gallon is very much a possibility as this crisis continues to drag on. Effectively, every cent increase in the price of gas is a tax on working class Americans. It is a bomb dropped on the average American's household finances, and if you combine that with higher food costs, which we are all going to have from the massive spike in wheat prices due to this crisis, we see a full-fledged financial war on working people right here at home. And this war was an avoidable one, born of idiotic green ideology, which excludes nuclear power and wholesale corruption pushed by the fossil fuel industry. Both seemingly have a vested interest in keeping America more vulnerable, higher energy prices, and keeping the status quo through their respective idiocies. But while we were arguing amongst ourselves, our adversary was watching and grinning. Russia produces a tremendous amount of oil and natural gas, much more than they could ever need. And yet, Putin has dramatically expanded nuclear power in his own country over the last decade. Why? Because he wanted a reliable source of domestic energy and to instead sell all of his surplus as much as possible to Europe and the rest of the world. All of Russia's natural gas. You never get high on your own supply, as the drug dealers say. And he hooked Western Europe on his supply. They were hooked because they succumbed to their green faction, which demanded that Germany decommission its own nuclear power plants. And that's great and all if you have something to replace it with. But unfortunately for the Germans, that something is called Russian natural gas. And then, when a war erupts on the European continent, what happens? Well, what happens is that the German consumers are screwed, and the German government had to bend over backwards to accommodate Russia until the invasion actually began. They are now scrambling to expand their LNG infrastructure for more imports, and hilariously enough, they are now thinking about delaying the decommissioning of those nuclear power plants because they are in such dire straits economically. We can never let this happen here. Our reliance on global energy markets is a noose around our neck as a country, both economically and from a national security standpoint. And yet, during Biden's speech, when he made many of the same directional points I'm making, he conspicuously left out a source of clean, reliable, cheap power. Let's take a listen.
To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world. And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers. Tonight, I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. America will lead that effort, releasing 30 million barrels of our own strategic petroleum reserve. And we stand ready to do more if necessary, united with our allies. These steps will help blunt gas prices here at home, but I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Are we? Because he continues to say that we can have solar, wind, and, quote, so much more. So much more is the whole ball game, folks. Wind and solar are really not that great uses of power. As Biden's own government admits, solar and wind power only produce their maximum power potential a respective 25% and 35% of the time. Nuclear power, on the other hand, is at 93%. Nuclear power produces just 4 to 5% of the carbon emissions of a natural gas-powered power plant. It actually releases less radiation into the environment than any other known energy source, than even solar, wind, natural gas, and coal. If you care about the environment, you need to be pro-nuclear. And if you care about having an energy source that can run in the good times and the bad at high capacity, then you should also be pro-nuclear. In fact, nuclear power is the only power source where legacy costs are not externalized. In other words, where the production of the energy itself produces costs for the community, a la greenhouse gases and other negative externalities. As for the so-called toxic waste, solar power actually creates 300 times more heavily toxic waste per unit of energy than nuclear power plants. So, why are people anti-nuclear? Number one, there are 2 decades worth of investment in wind and solar, and a lot of people just don't want to admit that those sources, while fine and good in some respects, are not the future in any measurable way alone. Number two, people, and specifically boomers, are still very scared of 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. Yet, if you even assume a Chernobyl-level event, the worst possible accident at a nuclear power plant is still less destructive than many of the major industrial events in the last city. A chemical leak, for example, in Bhopal, India, killed tens of thousands of people. We did not stop using industrial chemicals. We tightened safety standards. 26,000 people, for example, died in China when a dam broke. We don't stop using dams. As for nuclear waste, we've actually already solved the problem. The current U.S. waste isolation plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico, could accommodate the entire world's nuclear waste for the next 1,000 years. Yes, you heard me correctly. The day that Russia invaded Ukraine, we called on this show for a nuclear New Deal. And I stand by it even stronger right now. In the short term, we need to bring price pressure down, drill, frack, and alleviate concerns at the pump for people's bills. But in the long run, we have a moral and strategic imperative to secure our country with the most efficient, clean, and sustainable energy source that is around. If you believe maximalist rhetoric about climate change, I've got an answer for you. And if you believe that America needs to be stronger and more resilient, here's your answer too. It is time to build some nuclear power plants for the future of America, the future of the West, and the future of the planet. It's just amazing to me, Crystal, that they left nuclear out, and it's because of a very...
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.